that American children in general seem more out of control and ill-behaved than ever. And that's because their parents seem more ineffective and less likely to tell their children no than ever. You've seen it, the screaming, crying, foot-stomping little kids yelling at their parents and making demands in the mall, the grocery store, and virtually every restaurant one enters. It's not particularly surprising kids try that stuff. What's stunning is watching the impotent, terrified parents looking like deer caught in the headlights as it's happening. Now, is there a role for parenting in obesity? Absolutely, but this quote really disturbed me and really sort of spurred forth a lot of my research efforts, because one of the things that's concerning to me about it is that if we know that obesity is more common in low-income and minority children, and the frame that's going on in the public is often, it's all about bad parents. Those parents just either don't care or they're lazy, is what I hear a lot. I think that you're treading on really thin ice when it's being simplified in that way. In response to this, I said, you know what, let's study this. Let's see if parenting style is related to childhood obesity. Let's see. So those of you who have a background in early childhood may be familiar with these. These are the classic parenting styles that have been described in psychology research for a long time. So everyone's parenting style can supposedly be categorized into one of four groups. You can either be very sensitive but have a lot of rules, and that would be this group. And so those parents are authoritative. And so this is the stereotype of the ideal type of parenting. You're very sensitive, have lots of rules. Permissive is that you're very sensitive, but you have no rules. So you're very indulgent. It's the parents you see at a restaurant who just love their children so much, but they have no control over them whatsoever. Low sensitivity and high expectations for self-control is authoritarian. So this is the strict disciplinarian. And this is often the stereotype of what one thinks of with an inner city urban African-American mother. And I just want to make a side note that there have actually been studies that show that this type of parenting, this strict disciplinarian parenting, actually is associated with better outcomes in low-income African-American adolescent boys. And so I think you all have to stop and think about, gosh, you know, is there a particular type of parenting that might be better for some children in some life circumstances than others? And then finally, neglectful. No one's going to argue this is a good style of parenting. This is when one has low sensitivity and low expectations for self-control. So no rules, but it's not that you're so sensitive and loving. It's that you have no rules and you're just kind of disengaged. So here's what we found when we examined which type of parenting is associated with a higher risk of childhood obesity. So what was interesting, not so surprisingly, the authoritative parents, the ones who are very sensitive and have a lot of rules, that's the lowest risk. One might have thought, though, that being neglectful or being permissive, meaning that you're really sensitive but you have no rules, would be associated with the highest risk, but it wasn't. It was the authoritarian families, so the families in which the parents are very strict disciplinarians, in which one had the highest risk. So that was very interesting, and we thought to ourselves, what is going on with that? And this is controlling for things associated with that type of parenting. So that paper, again, got a lot of media hits, and here was the response to that. These are quotes from the articles in the papers. Strict parenting raises risk of childhood obesity. Okay. How parents mold their children's weight. Do very strict parents raise fat kids? Insensitive parents, chubby children. Study, mean maniacal mom made you fat. And it's all our fault anyhow. And so talking about parenting and obesity is really loaded, and people end up having a lot of feelings about it. So I became more interested in this, so we kept doing work in this area. We did a survey of pediatricians from around the nation and asked them, so what do you think? You're seeing kids and their families every day. What do you think about parenting and obesity? So we said, which of the following parenting styles is the most problematic for addressing childhood obesity? What pediatricians thought is that it was not the strict disciplinarians. They thought that it was when parents are too lax and indulgent. Some thought that it was when parents are too emotionally invested. Some thought when they're not emotionally invested enough. Some thought when they're too harsh and insensitive, and few thought that it was being too controlling, demanding, and restrictive. But most interestingly, and this really spurred some of our research questions, 90% of pediatricians agreed or strongly agreed that mother's use of food to make the child happy is a significant barrier to successful child weight management. So people were really picking up on that. I just want to interject. I have 3 kids myself. I'm a pediatrician. I don't operate in a vacuum. And every day I've got my kids saying to me, Mom, can I have a granola bar? And I'm saying, no, it's not dinner time. You have to wait. And so I think I feel on a daily basis what it's like to deal with these issues. So what does the child bring to the mother-child interaction around food? So we were doing some work in Head Start, and we decided to do some interviews with Head Start teachers about what their perceptions are of childhood obesity and eating behavior in the context of the Head Start setting, which is all children living in poverty. And one of Head Start's mandates is to make sure that children come to Head Start and are given a healthy breakfast and a healthy lunch, or a healthy lunch and a healthy snack, and that they are given adequate food, because a lot of these children come from food insecure homes where this may be the only healthy meal they're getting. So when we interviewed these teachers, here are some of the quotes they said. The children are always worried because they want seconds and thirds. It's like we're holding food back from them. They're afraid the food's going to be gone. They're so worried they're not going to get enough. Our children in Head Start are very anxious and very hungry. I think some of them are from more chaotic homes, the ones that grab two hands into the chicken nuggets trying to make sure they have enough food. Sometimes my kids get sick and vomit because they're that hungry. Shovel, shovel, shovel. And when I've talked with Head Start staff over the years, they do describe this behavior where they're bringing the children in and they're feeding them the meal, and these children, not all of them, but there's a subset that some of them are just gorging on the food. And when you talk to the Head Start staff and you say, so what do you do in that scenario? They're sort of stuck, because their mission in Head Start is to make sure these kids get a healthy meal, that they get food, because they may go home and not have access to a healthy meal and food. So are they supposed to make them stop eating? Are they supposed to restrict their eating? What are they supposed to do? And I think a lot of Head Start programs are struggling with what to do in that scenario, because sometimes the kids who are doing that are obese children. So what's going on there? We also did some interviews with low-income mothers, about 150 low-income mothers. It was about an hour-long interview, and we wanted to know their thoughts and opinions about why children are obese. And when we presented this, it really was in a way of saying, you know, researchers don't understand this. We really want to know your opinion and your thoughts, because you're a mom, you're an expert, you have ideas. And it was an hour-long interview, and at the very end, we would ask them, so what do you think? And I want to pause and say that when people have tried to do this before in a room full of people, where it's a group of 12 moms sitting around a table, and you say, why are children obese? In that setting, when they're surrounded by their peer group, they'll say, oh, it's all genetics. Nothing to do with parenting. It's all genetics. But then you get them in a room privately alone, and this is what we got. I definitely blame overweight children on the parents, 100%. I think it's because they're not educated, because they don't know any better. A lot of parents just don't care. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of parents that just don't care. Some parents feed their kids fat and let them be lazy in front of the TV all day, every day. I think children are overweight because of parents neglecting to do their jobs the way they should and not caring about their weight and their health. And then this mother said, there is people that, like the women that work here a lot, sometimes they can't take care of their kids. The mothers give them Twinkies, candy, and ice cream, and every day it's an everyday thing, cookies, and you know, to me, that's what causes a child to be overweight. And some of these quotes are actually from mothers whose own 3-year-old is obese. And so I guess what I'm getting at here is there's so much strong feeling, negativity, and criticism of parents who have overweight children, and we're trying to get more to the root of what's underlying the obesity. So our research projects, which I'll spend the next 10 minutes summarizing, focus on stress, self-regulation, eating behavior, and obesity. And let me give a little bit of background of the science behind this. So, and when I'm describing this, I would propose people think a bit about your own experience with eating. So science knows that when people are stressed, they eat more, and when they're having an emotionally difficult time, they eat more and they're more likely to become obese. Let me pause and interject. What the research shows is that when you're acutely stressed, like if someone very dear to you was just hospitalized because of a heart attack, it is true, you probably won't eat for 2 weeks and you will lose weight. But then in the months after that, your appetite goes up. And so during chronic stress, your appetite goes up and you tend to eat more. Children who are less able to cope with stress are more likely to be obese. We know that from prior studies. Stress increases cortisol, and cortisol is the stress hormone in your body. Cortisol, that stress hormone, increases appetite, and stress shifts food preferences to comfort foods, so foods high in added sugar and fat. And when you eat comfort food, meaning foods high in sugar and fat, we know from research in animals that eating that sort of food actually releases chemicals in your brain that make you feel better, that dampen down your stress. And so there's a reason it's called comfort food, and it really is comforting in your brain. Comfort food dampens the stress hormone axis in the brain, thereby making people feel better. So healthy patterns of cortisol, there are two ways that cortisol is released in your body. The first is everyone has a strong daily pattern in which your cortisol peaks in the morning, and then it drifts down over the course of the afternoon. Then you also have a separate pattern of cortisol that is a reaction to stress. So for example, the classic test is having someone get up and give a speech in front of a bunch of people. So what happens is that when the stressor occurs, your cortisol shoots up, and then it slowly drifts down. And I would just say, based on your personal experience, people experience this differently, and that if things are going really well, then your cortisol will go up, you'll be a little bit stressed, and then you'll finish that stressful thing you had to do, and you'll go about your day feeling just fine. But then have you ever had the experience that you do this challenging task, and you know, oh my goodness, my cortisol has just gone up, and then 5 hours later, you're still stressed out, like you still feel sort of like a little jittery, and you're thinking to yourself, I was done with my speech 5 hours ago. Why am I still feeling this way? And that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute, is that people have differences in their cortisol. So this is normal versus abnormal patterns of daily cortisol. So what we think is that a healthy normal pattern is you peak your cortisol in the morning and then it drifts down. Then there are two types of abnormal patterns. So one abnormal pattern is hypercortisolism, and we think this occurs in people who are living in stressful environments, that your cortisol goes up in the morning and it just never comes down. And so I guess I would think of a low-income child living in a dangerous neighborhood where perhaps there's not enough money for food, it's a stressful environment, their cortisol is just running high all day long. Alternatively, we see some patterns of adult men who are 40, 50 years old who had really stressful lives. Maybe they grew up in really difficult neighborhoods in poverty, and then they were in a war, and now they're 50 years old, and what you see is that their cortisol pattern, it's just shot out. There's no peak in the morning, there's no healthy rhythm. And this is based on about 20 years of research in psychology. People see this. And then these are different reactions to a stressor. So again, think of giving a speech. So there are some people who get up to give a speech and they never have that burst of cortisol. Perhaps that's good, but perhaps that's bad. What if you're like a vet who was in a war and you are in a stressful situation and you get no cortisol burst because you are just so burnt out, nothing causes your body to have that healthy physiology anymore. The healthy pattern would be to have this red line, but then an unhealthy pattern would be to have that burst and then it just doesn't come down, you don't recover. So think of a child who's living in a stressful environment, maybe something stressful happened to them that day and their body's not recovering from the stress. So the big picture is we think that when people experience stressful events over the course of their life and they get this cortisol stress response over and over and over again, but you can eventually burn it out. And so you start off normal, but as you get older, you turn into this hyper pattern where you're just high and you can't come down. And then if you burn it out, you just become hypo where you never mount a cortisol response. So what our theory is that is it possible that in these low-income children that they are living these stressed lives, they have these abnormal patterns of cortisol. We know that cortisol increases eating. It increases appetite. It increases your drive to eat cookies and candy and cake physiologically in your brain. And so then does that lead to obesity? Is that part of what's going on here? And sorry, let me just pause and mention, if you are a parent of a 3-year-old child and that 3-year-old child comes home from a stressful day and has a total tantrum for a cookie, I think as a parent, the question is, do you give the child that cookie or not? It is true that if you give that child that cookie, it's going to release chemicals in their brain that make them feel better. And I think as adults, we've all had the experience of coming home from a stressful day at work and saying, ooh, I really need a piece of cake. And you try to stop yourself, but then sometimes it just overwhelms you and you're like, I need the cake. And then you do, your brain changes and you feel better after the cake. So I think when that quote from the journalist who was saying these parents are just impotent and out of control and their child's having a tantrum for a cookie and the parent doesn't say no. Every parent's primary goal is for their child to be happy and well-adjusted and have good emotional and behavioral regulation and not be having a blowout tantrum because they're so upset. And so if as a parent at that moment your choice is, I know if I give my child one Oreo, he's going to feel better, and